Well, hello again, GVC folks. This week we are continuing our video series through the new City Catechism with question and answer 19. And last week we talked about the predicament that the human race has found itself in after the fall, and how all people have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, as the Apostle Paul says in Romans 3. And that this rebellion, because it is against an infinitely holy God, it comes at an infinitely massive price, and that price must be paid, right? And it's felt like we've been talking about this righteous standard of God that is revealed to us in His law for months now, and been talking about like how we all fall short of it in every way. And I know, like, I've really been feeling the weight of that, but if you have stuck with me so far and you've been following along with the unfolding story, we are finally coming out of that. We're finally coming into the real good news of the gospel. And I've tried along the way to give you a little taste of the good news of the gospel every time, without just leaving you feeling terrible about yourself. But now we're going to really dive into it here in question and answer 19, all right? So here we go. Question 19. Is there any way to escape punishment and be brought back into God's favor? Answer: yes. To satisfy His justice, God Himself, out of mere mercy, reconciles us to Himself and delivers us from sin and from the punishment of sin by a Redeemer. All right? So our question this week is essentially asking, is there any way out of this mess that we have gotten ourselves into? And the answer is yes. All right. In His infinite goodness and faithfulness, God has made a way. God perfectly illustrates this for us in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. You know, the story of the deliverance of the Israelite people out of Egypt perfectly foreshadows the story of the redemption of the world. If you remember that story, kids, right? The Exodus, the Israelites had just left Egypt, and they find themselves on the shore of the Red Sea. Nothing ahead of them but ocean or sea, water, whatever. And behind them, they've noticed now, are the full might of Egypt's army pressing in on them with fury, and because they've all just lost their firstborn sons, and they want to destroy Israel. And so Israel is now pressed against the sea with nowhere to go, with this enemy army coming down on them. And it seems, humanly speaking, that their situation is utterly hopeless, right? But God, unlike you and me, is always faithful to His promises, right? And as we heard just this past Sunday from Pastor Paul about how God made a promise to Abraham, right? And He promised Abraham that He was going to bring redemption to the whole world through his offspring. And Israel, the Israelite people who were escaping Egypt, were that offspring, right? And so we know, because God is faithful to His promises, we can be confident that He is going to accomplish what He set out to accomplish, despite any apparent obstacles that stand in the way, no matter how difficult they may be, or how unimaginable it may be that there would be a way around them. Right? Because God can do the unimaginable. Right? God can do what only God can do, because God made the universe, and the laws that govern it, they're subject to His will. And so in that moment, when Israel is pressed against the sea with Egypt bearing down on them, God does the unimaginable, right? No one could have predicted that God would part the waters of the sea and the people would just walk through, right? No one could have imagined that this would be the way that God would deliver his people. And in the same way, nobody could have predicted that Jesus would be the way of escape from sin and its due penalty for you and for me, right? No one in their right mind would have predicted that the same infinitely holy God, against whom our sin is, that he would condescend, right? Which means that he would lower himself to our level, to allow himself to take the full cost of that sin that was against him, that sin and the rebellion, on himself. But that's exactly what he did. And I don't think most of us really appreciate how truly unimaginable that is. Just this past Sunday in church, Pastor Paul mentioned that for many of us who grew up in homes with Christian parents, we're incredibly privileged by that, right? Because we get to hear about Jesus from our infancy onward. We hear the story of the gospel over and over, so it's very familiar to us, right? And while this is an incredible gift, because the story becomes so familiar to us, it can become easy for us to forget just how scandalous and unthinkable and amazing the reality of the gospel is, right? Because as things become more familiar to us, we kind of don't think about them as much anymore. But apart from Jesus, you and I are no different from those Israelites. In a spiritual sense, it's the same hopeless situation. You are trapped until Jesus comes along and makes a way that nobody could have predicted for you. All right, this is the picture of it. And now, rather than being stuck on the shores of the ocean, facing sure and certain death, spiritually speaking, with Jesus, Romans 8 says, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. You have been miraculously delivered from certain slavery to sin and death, okay? And have been set free in Jesus. And that is amazing. And we are going to talk all about that in the upcoming weeks. We're going now into an exhaustive section about who Jesus is and what he did. All right? But that's enough for this week. I'll see you back here next week.